Everyone, what a marvelous turnout on a rainy night. I am Linda Mattis O'Connell, and I am your moderator for this evening. I am the convener of the League of Women Voters of Springfield. So welcome to this candidate forum for the Hampshire, Franklin, and Worcester district seat in the Massachusetts State Senate. This forum is co-sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Franklin County, the Daily Hampshire Gazette, the Recorder, Greenfield Community Television, and Northampton Community Television. Please note that the community television stations are recording this event. Northampton is broadcasting live, and the forum will be available for live streaming on both the GCTV and the NCTV websites. A word, if I may, about the League of Women Voters. We envision a democracy where every person has the desire, the right, the knowledge, and the confidence to participate. As an assertively nonpartisan organization, we encourage the informed and active participation of citizens in government. We work to increase understanding of major public policy issues and influence public policy through education and advocacy. But before we get started, I would really like us to take a moment, talk about participation, to thank all the volunteers who are making this event possible. Volunteers, where are you? Wave, thank you. Thank you much. Now, as moderator of this forum, it is my job to move us crisply through a range of questions aimed at getting to know the candidates and exploring the issues with them. I'd like to note that I do not live in this Senate district, and therefore I have no skin in this game. With us tonight are the candidates: Ryan O'Donnell, Chelsea KLINE, Steve Connor, and Joe COMERFORD. Joe, Steve, and Ryan are waging write-in campaigns. Also with us are panelists Stanley MOULTON, opinion and political editor of the Daily Hampshire Gazette, and Marie Gauthier, president of the League of Women Voters of Franklin County, who will be asking questions on behalf of you all. Here's how the evening will go forward. The panelists will take turns asking questions, with one audience question from Marie for each of Stan's questions. When Stan has concluded his questions, we will continue with audience questions for a total of 18 questions tonight. The forum will conclude with 2-minute closing statements from each candidate. Now, audience, we hope you are writing down questions on your index cards. Please feel free to keep writing as thoughts come up. It is important that the questions be addressed to all 4 candidates. So when you're done, continue to raise that card above your head so a league representative can come and collect it. You should know that a league panel will quickly review these questions, perhaps combining similar questions and choosing those that allow for the greatest range of issues to be discussed. Those questions will be passed along to Marie so she may ask them on your behalf. Again, please silence your cell phones. Please do not clap after individual candidate answers and statements. We will thank them all at the end. Candidates, on timing, you will be given 90 seconds to answer each question. In order to be fair, it is critically important that you adhere to the amount of time allotted. When you have 30 seconds left, a timekeeper in the front row will hold up a sign. Everybody sees her. And at the end of your 90 seconds, there will be a firm stop signal. At that time, we ask that you finish your sentence in a few words. I will call on each panelist alternately for each question, and the candidates will rotate being the first to answer. The candidates have drawn numbers to determine the initial order of response, and the order, as you can see, is Joe, Steve, Chelsea, and Ryan. So, we will begin tonight with a question from the Gazette's Stan Moulton. Stan, you're up.
Okay, I think we're good. What one aspect of your experience or characteristic of your leadership style will make you a better state senator than your three opponents?
We begin with Joe.
Hello, everyone. First, I want to say thank you so much to the League, Recorder, Gazette, and NCTV and GCTV, and to you all for coming. One thing I'll highlight now is my leadership at National Priorities Project. I was executive director at National Priorities Project for 7 years. For folks who don't know, NPP is a research organization, a budget research organization, and one of the things that the legislature is responsible for doing, and I would say a main thing that we're responsible for doing, is passing a budget. So NPP had to crack open the federal budget so that lawmakers and activists at the state and the local level could understand the impact of federal spending, but do much more than that, because we were about participation. So we cracked open the information so that lawmakers and at the state and local level and activists at the state and local level could push up from the ground and help determine both how we make our money in local and state government and the federal government and how we spend it. And I would posit that my ability to understand tax policy, which I believe we have to tackle at the legislative level. I don't think we have a spending problem in the Commonwealth. I think we have a revenue problem. And my ability to articulate community-centered spending priorities will make me a fierce and bold advocate for this Senate district. Thank you.
Steve.
Good evening, and thank you to the sponsors. The aspect of experience that I bring is I run a government agency. I'm a veteran service officer. I'm the director of a program that has 11 communities. I understand what cities and towns need to get from state government, the struggles they have in communicating and getting all that they need, but more importantly, I know what families and individuals need. And I help them get that stuff from state government every single day, and in some cases, federal government. I know how to help people. I know how to use the tools of government to help people and make the best of their lives that they can, whether it's people with disabilities, whether it's young children that are DCF involved, whether it's veterans, or people who are just plain and simply homeless. I know how to try to get them what they need. I have that experience, and I do it through a government, and I run a relatively large budget for our communities to get those things done. Thank you.
Chelsea.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Chelsea KLINE. I use she, her pronouns. Thank you so much to the sponsors for organizing this, and thank you to you all for being here on this rainy night. What sets me apart is a few things. One is that I am not someone who goes along to get along. I'm not someone who just goes along with the status quo. I am someone who believes in focusing on people over profits. I am someone who is passionately in love with this district and is willing to raise some eyebrows and rock the boat in the name of standing up for this district. I am also pretty used to working in complicated bureaucratic systems, otherwise known as higher education, and for advocating for the little guys, AKA my adjunct faculty, to the higher level administrators. I've been a social justice and reproductive rights activist for over 20 years, and what that means to me is constantly asking who's not at the table, who's not being looked out for, and why not? And how can we bring them into that circle and bring them to the table? It also means to me that I never want to be a mouthpiece. I want to be an inclusive collaborator, and I want to make sure that I am not only listening, but I'm bringing people into the work that I would be doing if I am elected. Thank you so much.
Ryan.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Ryan O'Donnell. I'm the president of the Northampton City Council, and I've been on the City Council for about 5 years. And what I'd like to highlight is some of what I've learned in that role, not as an advocate on the outside, but as someone who has actually been a legislator at the local level. I have written local legislation. I've built support for it. I've negotiated the details. I've worked through complicated amendments and through committee processes and brought the public in. And then I've got my colleagues to vote for these things, as well as budgets. Some of the things I'm proudest of working on include an ordinance that states that Northampton will never privatize its water system, an ordinance that says Northampton will have 1/2 of the money in politics that the rest of the state has, an ordinance that says we will extend the state minimum wage law, which does not apply to municipal employees, startlingly, to the local level. I believe in the legislative process. I believe you can get things done through it, and I think what people like Stan Rosenberg did so well was use the legislative process to get results for Western Massachusetts. What's most important is we have a state senator who can take our ideals that we believe in and translate them through the legislative process into results for our region. That's what I've done as a local legislator, and that's what I will do as a member of the state Senate.
Thank you. Marie, are you ready with a question from the audience?
I
This
am.
question will go first to Steve.
If elected, how would you address homelessness and the need for affordable housing in the counties you represent?
When it comes to homelessness, that is the root of my campaign. That's a significant part of what I want to see changed. The first thing that we need to do is educate all the landlords about Section 8, what it involves, but we also have to look at the programs that support it. The other thing that state could do pretty quickly is come up with enough MRVPs, Massachusetts Rental Voucher Program, to house all the people who are outside and need a place. If we think about it, people with disabilities get $750 from Social Security income. The state may throw in another $114, $135. Tell me someplace you can get rent that's only going to be 30% of your income of $750. It isn't going to happen. So I have a lot to say about it, but I'm already down to 30 seconds. But that's the first step, and then once you house people under the Housing First model, you then provide wraparound services to get them what they need. And it's not as easy as it thinks. It's not just going to be one person that's going to help them. It's going to take a team of people to keep them housed. But you can't make them feel safe, you cannot make them secure, and you cannot do anything else to help them if you can't get them stable in housing first.
The question will go next to Chelsea.
Hello. Well, the first thing that I would want to do would be to talk about job creation. There's many actually things that I want to do sort of all at once. I want to move them along simultaneously. I would love to work for broadband internet because I think if we have access to information and we are connected to the world, then we are able to be a better informed society and people can have access to jobs that way. I want to talk about job creation and I want to make sure that we are upholding the $15 minimum wage, and I know that just passed, thank goodness, and making sure that we have livable wages here in Western Massachusetts. I want to be addressing the issue of property taxes. So if we pass an amendment for a progressive tax system and we are able to actually fund our schools, then that will keep our property taxes lower, which would make home ownership or rental more attainable for people. I also want to invest in our public transportation system. So if we move all of these things along all together, then that, and also of course working on our fraying social safety net and talking about and working for for comprehensive social and social programs and healthcare across the lifespan so that people are well cared for and not falling through the social safety net, so that we can move all of these things along together and hopefully prevent homelessness.
Joe, will you answer, please?
Sure.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, we're mixing it up
All
a
right.
little
Oh,
bit.
my fault.
It's not going to just keep going around, so you have to be aware.
On our toes.
You're teaching old dogs new tricks, I'm just telling you.
We're nimble. Okay. So some of the first work I did before I went back to school for an MSW, a Master's in Social Work, was around homelessness and homelessness advocacy. And so what I learned in that advocacy, and then later on as I led a crisis intervention outreach team here in the region, is that homelessness is really based on root causes of chronic poverty and income insecurity. So one way to tackle homelessness here is to look at the intersection of root causes like lack of access to transportation, lack of addiction care, lack of early childhood education, lack of access to good and nutritious food, and so we can imagine that intersection. So we have to tackle that as a holistic issue. Then, and Steve started to get at this really well, Section 8 vouchers. Of course, we need advocacy around Section 8, but the list for Section 8 is groaningly long. So we do need to invest in the Massachusetts rental voucher program here, and we need to invest, and this is where cities and towns need this kind of support from the legislature. We need to invest in affordable housing stock. Because in fact we need that not only for communities of people who are homeless, but we need it for new homeowners in this region. So it's an economic justice issue all the way to an economic development issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan.
So now I'll go.
Now you go.
I've fought for affordable housing in my community in Northampton. I voted to appropriate money to build it. And in fact, when we did so in recent years, we did something which doesn't always happen, which is we built it right downtown. We tend to segregate people economically in our society, put people at the outskirts. That's not how it should be. If you do that, you sever connections to all important things like transportation. Poverty is more of a symptom or a result of many other problems. And I think what you have to do is, legislatively, I think you need to protect funding for crucial services. For example, I'm not sure why it's become a holiday tradition for our governor to freeze funding for Craig's Doors and Amherst at the crucial time of the season when people need a place to go. We need more beds in the shelters throughout our region. We need to make sure that the FRTA bus system has weekend service. I'm not sure how you get from affordable housing to employment, to the grocery store, to healthcare without those critical connections. And we also need to fight to give the funding and actually, I would say, zoning reform legislation to empower our communities to build affordable housing, a mix of it. And I'd like to see it be inclusive because at the end of the day, this is one society, and we ought not to segregate people. We need an inclusionary strategy so all of us can live in dignity.
Thank you. Now the next question is from Stan, and it will go first. Are you ready, Joe? To Joe.
Come on.
Several of you mentioned economic development as a key to affordable housing. What's the single most important element to stimulating economic development in the Senate district?
I don't know that I have one single most important. When I think about economic development, I think of a coin with two sides, right? So imagine this. So on one side, there are actually the employers and the jobs, and on the other side, there are the employees, and the employees are ready to take the jobs. And I think both are important. So on the employer and jobs side, we need the legislature to help stimulate employers to come to Western Massachusetts. Part of the way that we do that is we make sure our infrastructure is up to snuff. We have, broadband, high-speed internet everywhere. Our roads and bridges are in good shape. Another part of the way we do that is through incentives, government incentives to locate certain businesses in a particular sector, say, for example, good jobs in green economy, right? We could incentivize those kinds of jobs. And then we have to think about the employee structure. And the employee structure needs access to public transportation, affordable housing, needs access to good education from communities like GCC and the University of Massachusetts, that actually mesh with the kind of jobs we're trying to bring in. And together, these good jobs and employers and employees ready to do the work will actually come together and help lift all boats in a local economy. Another thing that we have to think about is, of course, our connection to Boston, which I want to talk about later, but we do need to think about the kind of rail and bus service we have, not only in this region, but that actually gets us and ties us to Boston.
Thank you. Chelsea.
Well, there's a few things that I'm really excited about, and I know you wanted a single answer, but I'm going to sneak in a few. First and foremost, I think we need fully funded public schools, because that is the basis of a just and moral society, and that's the society and a community that I want to live in, where we have people that are well educated. And I think that would then, in turn, attract more people here if we have fully funded public schools, and we'll be able to retain families in our communities. And yet, we also need transportation. We need high-speed internet. We need all of these things to keep people here and to keep us viable, to keep us robust, to keep us on the edge, the cutting edge. And we also need to be investing in our small businesses and our small towns, keeping them viable, making it realistic and affordable for people to start and maintain businesses here. And that, of course, includes single-payer health care and making sure that people are able to live healthy lives. And I also think that we need to be supporting our farms. That is something that's very, very special here and can create jobs and give us local healthy food. So all of these things working together will allow us to be strong economically.
Thank you. Ryan.
I'm actually not a fan of tax incentives to get one big company to move someplace. I think we've seen what happens when we pin our hopes on companies like GE. You know, GE left Pittsfield and with devastating results, and now it's going to Boston, and caveat emptor to them, or Amazon or something like that. I think the real economic development solution is a really hard slog, to be honest. And I would like to point out that the state senator really plays a de facto role in helping local communities get grant funding and pursue specific economic development opportunities, especially after county government really no longer plays that role. I mean, there are communities like Northampton that have substantial resources in-house. They have a planning department, they have a large DPW, and so on. A lot of our rural communities don't have that, and so the role of the legislature is to help facilitate those things. The economic strategies we pursue, I want them to be sustainable. For example, in the town of Orange, okay, through the tax credit, we encouraged the filming of a television series based on something Stephen King wrote. And that put a lot of economic development money directly into the local economy. If you're going to depend sustainability from an author, I guess Stephen King is good because he's so prolific. But at the end of the day, that's not a strategy. What we need is to invest systematically in our institutions, the University of Massachusetts being first and foremost. And also, I want to make sure whatever we do lifts wages for all people, because they put that right back into the economy.
Thank you. Marie, another audience question. Oh, I'm so sorry. We skipped. Who did we skip? Steve.
Steve.
My bad. Steve.
I must be quiet and unassuming.
Yes, we've called more attention to you, however, so I'm so sorry.
Again, there is no one answer, one topic. What I would say is in my experience, I've been working with veterans for over 14 years. Before that, I worked with people with disabilities, cognitive disabilities, physical and mental disabilities. What I've seen is if you put in the right effort, if you come up with the right strategy, amazing things can happen in the jobs. Just 10 years ago, veterans' unemployment was skyrocketing, out of control. But I worked with both the State Department of Employment and Training and with my local programs for the Franklin, Hampshire district. And we ended up getting a team of collaborators who went out and talked to industries, talked to businesses and said what veterans can do for you and how you can make it work. Educating employers, yes, were there some tax breaks for it? For some people, yes. Otherwise, it was just some employers were just trying to do the right thing and do the best that they could. And we have lowered veterans' unemployment to lower than the regular average in the state or the country. government can really do it if they focus, if they laser focus on things. I think we also should really think about the most clean industry we can get to bring in here, so that we don't have a lot of pollution that goes with it, but that it's good, safe jobs. And we've got to really work at getting those jobs to the places where the people are.
Thank you. And now Marie and the audience.
If Congress is successful in overturning the Americans with Disabilities Act, what would you do at the state level to provide for the Commonwealth's citizens with disabilities?
And we will begin with Ryan.
I think there's no question that the state has to lead in all the categories where the federal government is failing us. One that's not hypothetical, Northampton is a sanctuary city. So we don't comply with detainer requests from Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which is basically the idea of having the federal government use state and local resources to enforce their own immigration law, and it's just an immoral and unjust system. So we have our own policy. In the event that you describe, I would say it's important that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts assert our values, again, through law. I think you're raising the crux of what I was trying to say in the first question. We need to take our values and protect them, codify them. Everyone has an opinion, but the question is, can we take that and put it into law and into practice? I also think, even under the current system with the Americans with Disabilities Act, we need to provide more funding to cities and towns to upgrade. I mean, this is New England. It's kind of an old part of the country. I can tell you, downtown Northampton, there's a lot of places that are not accessible, even in Northampton. I'd like to see more funding to actually turn the laws that exist today into a reality because, again, I think we all agree this should be a society in which everyone has equal access and equal opportunity to enjoy the communities that we're trying to protect.
Thank you. Joe?
One thing that I've started to say while I'm out at community meetings is that there are two things the legislature can get done and do very, very well. One of them is push forward 21st century thinking, keep the lights on in democracy where nothing seems possible in Washington. But the other is something that I call a line of defense. And especially now, with Donald Trump in the White House, I would posit, and the court turning more and more conservative, and Congress unable to protect our citizens here in the United States, I would suggest that the legislature has to form a line of defense for the Commonwealth, and that's a role of a state senator. And in terms of disability rights, and this has been something that's actually I've been learning, and it's been coming up at the campaign, and I'm very grateful to be more and more aware of the nuance when we say disability rights. Ability is, of course, across a spectrum. So the law has to be as nuanced as the people of our district are. So we have to think ability in terms of hearing, in terms of sight, in terms of physical movement, because access is a critical piece of democracy. And the minute that we lose sight of that, the minute that we let the legislature come back from the laws that defend, not only defend, but fund the kind of access and disability rights that we need in our institutions, in our schools, then we take a step backwards. And I think the legislature can bring that forward.
Steve, we're on to you.
So, first of all, I don't think the citizens of Massachusetts would stand for it, for them to really undo it. But if it did, I think the citizens of Massachusetts would gather. I would definitely bring in all the advocacy organizations for people with disabilities or varying abilities into our state government and have issues that they're going to face as a family and as individuals that already aren't getting met through even the ADA. I think we can do better than we have. But it also means that we've got to make sure that we know our job is to take care of our neighbors. And when you talk about people with disabilities, think about your own lives. How quickly could you end up being one of those people with a disability, a stroke, a car accident? If you tell legislators that their own family, they could go to war, anything could happen, and they were going to be the ones that were going to be discriminated against, I think you can convince people that that's not the good choice. In Massachusetts, I think we could gather and bring in around the wagons and circle and get to those groups with people with disabilities and make sure that their needs are met. It would be a huge challenge without the federal government, but boy, I'd love to take it on.
And Chelsea, we will end this question with you.
I grew up with an older brother who was born with both of his feet backwards. He has a rare birth defect called arthrogryposis. So I know how heartbreaking and enraging it is when we would go to a restaurant and there was an inaccessible bathroom or no curb cuts. This will not happen on my watch. I will absolutely fight for people with different abilities, whether it's intellectual, whether it's developmental, whether it's physical. We need to look out for all of our people. I will look out for all of our people in this district, no matter what their abilities are, and I will fight like hell to make sure that our ARCs are fully funded. I will make sure that we have line items in our school budgets to make sure that we still keep the circuit breaker intact, so when kids come in with different needs and different abilities in schools, that schools are actually able to fund those needs and fund those kids. I will absolutely fight for our people.
Thank you. Now, Stan, we are with you and your question for the panel, and this time we're going to go right down the line. I'm, giving you less cognitive load. We're going to just go straight down. Stan.
As a first-year senator, what would be your top priority in terms of changes in the funding of public education in Massachusetts?
Straight down the road.
Starting, yes, I'm so sorry,
All right.
Joe. Starting
I'm
with
on.
you, number
Okay.
one. Yes.
Priority number one in terms of education for me would be to fix the foundation budget. The foundation budget was a good idea with ed reform. The legislature had it right. We cannot fund our public schools solely through property taxes. That means that communities that are poor have poor schools. Totally the case, right? So we need a foundation budget. It was a good idea, but it has not kept pace with need. It has not kept pace with capital infrastructure, with healthcare costs, with ELL costs, with special ed costs. And that was the fight of this term that we lost in the 11th hour. The fight was to have the foundation budget come up to meet the needs of school districts. And so that's that. And while I have a little bit of more time, I'd want to also fix the funding mechanism, which actually disproportionately burdens Western Massachusetts. We pay more than our fair share compared to the East. I would want to go down to pre-K. We need universally accessible and affordable pre-K. It determines one's life path, and we need affordable community college and public higher ed, and I would start with free community college and move to free public higher ed. That's the whole span of one's life, and education should be a human right. It also turns out that it's a good fiscal policy to do this up front. We not only get the kind of electorate and work base that we need and deserve, but in fact later we have the economic benefit.
Thank you. Steve.
So I guess the first thing I would do is start the transition, and I think the Senate bill was along that line of actually dumping the foundation budget. It was good at the time, but it was a snapshot, and it didn't allow for any changes to happen. And there's been a lot of things that have happened in the schools. The regionalization promises of the state government didn't come to fruition, so that's become a big problem for it. We need to transition from funding our children's education from property taxes to state taxes that would give the same child or every child the same access to education throughout the state. It's not going to be an easy process, but that's the only way it's ever going to be fair. The other thing I would do is fight and get the Attorney General to fight with the federal government to fully fund special education. It has never been fully funded since they started it, and that's both transportation and the needs of the kids. It was mandated by the federal government. They promised us, they never delivered. So we've got the federal government who hasn't lived up to their promise, state government hasn't lived up to their promise to regionalization, and I think it's time we hold it accountable for all our children. A kid who grows up in Holyoke shouldn't have a different experience in education than a kid that grows up in Hatfield. I just feel we can make it better. Thank you.
Thank you. Chelsea.
I think that we need to totally rethink the way that we are funding public education. It is completely unsustainable. First and foremost, I think that we should get rid of standardized testing. I don't need a test to figure out which kids are low income. We are spending $30 million a year on standardized testing, and instead we should be allowing schools to teach to the child and to the individual child and bringing more fun and more innovation into education instead of teaching to a high-stakes test. I also think that the Senate can really take the lead on taxing rich people and bringing more revenue into education. We need a progressive tax system. We simply need more funding for education. I am definitely opposed to the charter school expansion. I really believe that existing charter schools need to be held to the same exact standards as our community schools. What else did I want to say about that? I also wanted to add that the charter tuition has gone up by what? It grew to $60.3 million statewide, and then but the aid only was what, $119 million. So that means that we have educated 4% of the state's public students, and yet that absorbed 51% of the total increase of the aid. So my concern is that we're putting a lot of money into the charter systems. We need to be bringing that money into our community schools, is what I'm trying to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I am going to remind the audience, if questions are coming up, please write them on your index cards. If you need another one, raise your hand. Ryan.
I think this is one of those where we have enormous goals, like totally opening up the foundation budget formula again so that we achieve the promise that is actually in the Massachusetts Constitution of providing an equal education to every student. And this is a $1 billion or more prospect. To that end, I think while you pursue these things, you have to pursue other things on a parallel track. So the first thing that this delegation is going to have to do as a team, you have to remember, this is not just the Senate. We're losing a lot of House representatives as well. The whole region is undergoing a lot of transition, but the whole region has to work as a team. So I think one of our first priorities as a delegation is to restart a method of getting some kind of progressive tax on large incomes to generate the revenue we need to actually do something, because unless we have that, we're not going to be able to do it. Most important, I think, well, not most important, but perhaps most immediately, I'd like to review the reimbursement mechanisms we have for charter schools. I can tell you that charter schools have cost my community over $25 million since the advent of charter schools. And second, very important for this district, regional transportation costs. The regional schools in our district many of them are suffering declining enrollments anyway because they're rural communities. We need greater sparsity aid, and we also need to reform how we pay for public transportation for those students.
Thank you. Marie, an audience question, please.
A developer is seeking to build a huge Dollar General store here in Deerfield, and residents here fear that, if approved, this box store would signal the end of Deerfield as we know it. Dollar General has plans to build huge stores every 5 or 6 miles, so although this is Deerfield's issue today, all other towns in the Hampshire, Franklin, Worcester district will be facing the issue soon. As our next elected senator, how would you help our local communities gain more control over development and more power to stand up to large corporations seeking to build unwanted box stores?
Thank you. This question will first go to Steve.
That's a good one. I had been living in Greenfield or actually I think I was still in Whately when they talked about building a big box store, beginning with a W, into the community. And the reality was it was going to kill downtown. It was going to kill so many businesses, and I think that was a strike that I think was too much for Greenfield. That same box store moved into Northampton, and Northampton was able to absorb it and survive. Why? It had a very unique downtown. The shopping that happens there is very unique. I hope that someday, with enough support that Greenfield can get to the same place where it is very unique, and that big box stores can't just come in and wipe out the entire town economy. Deerfield, it would change it drastically. I would do whatever I could to restrict these big box stores from coming in. People think they're getting a great deal, but they're not getting a great deal. When you have these places come in, they don't pay good wages, there's no benefits that come with them for many of those, and the people that are then being employed can't give back into the community. That was really fast. Thank you.
Thank you. Chelsea.
I'm glad you mentioned the Walmart situation. I'm also thinking of a similar situation in Greenfield where there was a motion to bring in a biomass burning facility. And the community members there said absolutely not, that the evidence pointed to it being a bad choice environmentally and for people's as a public health issue. And they pushed back hard enough and said no. And I appreciate and respect when people stand up and say no. I have been an activist for a long time, and I am pretty excited about being involved in community efforts to maintain our morals about things that we care about. So as a senator, if I am elected, I will be working to maintain local controls over people's towns and the things that people care about. And not allowing big box stores to come in and ravage our downtowns is very high on my list. That also means that we need to keep our rents low in our small towns so that people can actually open businesses and maintain businesses. I'm seeing what's happening with some of our towns where the rents are just so high that people are not able to have their business, maintained. So I think moving those things along simultaneously, and again, keeping people in our town so that they can buy the things that they need, and keeping our stores diversified so that we have everyday items there so that we don't need a Dollar General to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ryan?
I think, hearkening back to the first question you asked, what distinguishes us, I think I'm the only candidate who reads zoning ordinances for entertainment. I think zoning is fun. I want to work on it. I think the only person who was working on zoning in the legislature really was Steve Kulik. And his departure is actually a big loss because zoning law describes basically the fabric of our communities. And for a place like Deerfield, like I said before, a place that doesn't have its own kind of internal planning resources to help do this right, I think you always run the risk of well-resourced corporations coming in and getting what they want from small towns, and that shouldn't be the case. What we need are laws that encourage sustainability, walkability, inclusion. You can do a lot with zoning, and I would like to be one of those who helps protect our cities and towns through law, and this is a case where you have to do it. What the development in Deerfield, I'm pretty sure, they can't just do it by right. It triggers some kind of special permit review process. But there's actually enormous power there. And what I think we should do is revisit the zoning law to give communities the power to get the results they want out of development. Because development can go one of two ways. Every town wants more tax base and more resources and to some extent development. But what kind? What kind? And I think my view of being a state senator is playing a crucial role in helping communities solve that.
I really want to compliment the panel on their excellent timing. Thank you so much. And Joe?
So, as folks know, what's happening here with this conversation in Deerfield is, of course, happening across the country, and particularly in rural communities, like Western Massachusetts. The issue is, of course, one of tax revenue, largely. Communities are thinking about development in ways that help generate more taxes for city and town budgets that are groaning under the weight of things like higher and higher costs of public education. So the legislature does need to look at a holistic approach. So it is, yes, it's both zoning and how do we think about business development at the state level, and how do we give, say, for example, incentives for keeping land open, like APR, which I'm in strong favor of, which helps people with, farmers especially, sell back development rights to their land so that they can have the capital they need to both develop their land and keep it free from they can both farm their land and keep it free from development. So we need to think along those kind of holistic ways. We need to think about the tax base that cities and towns need. And then we need, at the legislative level, to think about the kind of job creation that brings jobs in that are not seated in big boxes, but really foster a diverse local economy that's able to pay good wages while bringing in community-centered businesses that then pay taxes and help city and town budgets meet these 21st century needs.
Thank you. Stan, we are looking for another question from you.
Yeah, I'm tempted to ask a question to test Ryan's theory that he's the only candidate who reads zoning ordinances for entertainment, but I won't. Instead,
I would be happy to be wrong.
I'm gonna ask a question about agriculture. As you've campaigned in the district, what have you heard from farmers as their number one need to stay in business?
This question will begin with Chelsea.
Great. Well, number one need is that farmers, I don't know about number one, there's so many needs for farmers right now. I think a big one is access to land, either to lease and have a sustainable or expected connection with that land that they're leasing so that they can actually invest in the soil, or to make land that's actually, find land that's affordable and have parcels that are closer together. I know that's sort of a pie in the sky, but that's what they're talking about that they need, and I think that's something that we should be working on to make sure that our farmers actually have land that they can afford and that they can invest in the soil. I also think that we really need to expand our APR program, as Joe was speaking about, but I think that they need to be able to diversify their income streams and increasing or expanding APR, reforming APR so that they are able to have different ways of bringing in money, whether it's like a little store or a different kind of product or all of the above. That will keep our farms viable, and that's what I hear from farmers that they need. I also really believe very strongly that we need to fully fund our Healthy Incentive Program, or HIP, so that we have proven that when we connect farmers to consumers, that it benefits everybody. So strengthening that program and fully funding it so that people can actually be connected to farms and they can get healthy local food. And I think all of these things working together would be great for farmers, and I know that there's actually much more.
Thank you. Ryan.
Let me talk about dairy farms. Dairy farms in Massachusetts, there's a small number of them, a shrinking number of them, but they're large farms, so they represent a lot of conserved land. They pretty much wouldn't exist if not for the dairy farm tax credit that's provided to them by the Commonwealth. And the reason why we have to do that is because there's a federal system that sets the price of milk, which is so convoluted that I think it involves a hamster on a wheel at some point. It's like a Rube Goldberg device, you know. It's based on all these strange things. We need to support our dairy farmers financially in that way. And then there are policy things that I think we need to look at basically for affordability. I can tell you that almost everyone that I once went to the Greenfield Farmers Market, and I just asked this question of people who were there. I asked about health care. And a lot of people just told me that at least one person in their family had access to health care somewhere else. And I think that if we had single-payer health care that we provided everybody, I think that would help go a long way for farms. I think another thing about farms, which we don't often talk about, is that there's a large connection between them and climate change. There's a state climate change mitigation grant, and I haven't seen that Western Massachusetts has gotten its fair share relative to other parts of the state, but there are special challenges for farms, higher temperatures, higher evaporation rates, and there are best practices that they can adopt and actually maybe even make them more profitable that we should be supporting through policy.
Thank you, Joe.
So I've had an incredible time during the campaign meeting with farmers in the district, and this is what I've heard. I heard that the dairy tax credit is vital, right? We've lost, let's see, I had written down the number, 95% of our small dairy farms over the last 50 years in Massachusetts. The ones that are continuing to be with us are hanging on, so we have to help them actually get the cost of their milk so that we can continue to have them in our midst. They're 18% of our open land, or dairy land. We need the Healthy Incentives Program. A farmer I met with out in Amherst, 15% of his sales every single month is HIP program. So that's food stamps plus incentives. The incentives is our job at the legislature to keep pushing that through. We do need to expand the APR program, and we need to actually make sure that farmers get the true value of their land so they have an incentive to actually sell the development rights of their land. We need to support organizations like CISA that are helping do business development for farmers. Farmers in our valley are diversifying. So they're not only doing produce or dairy, they're diversifying, they're setting up stores. They need allies to be able to do that. And then we need the climate mitigation grants, but actually tied to that, we need environmental justice grants because our farmers' soil is sequestering carbon. They want to do that better. We need to help them by getting sequestration grants for low tillage farms. That will not only help the farmer, it's going to help our environment.
Steve.
Buy local, local, local. Seriously, we have to, as a community, understand, support our farmers. We need to get more access to farmers markets, educate people the benefits of buying shares from local farmers. We could spend a lot less time in the supermarket and a lot more time meeting our neighbors if we worked really on a campaign to shop local. One of the best programs that they did come up with was the HIP program, the Healthy Incentive Program. When it was first being introduced, before any money was put in, I was on a committee for Hampshire County on how best do we get the people who really need the healthiest food with low dollars, those with SNAP benefits, how do we get it to them? Well, we did a whole education plan, and it worked great. So well that the money ran out in 1 year instead of 3. And then it took the legislators so long to refund it that all of a sudden people started thinking, oh, I guess the program's done now because they said it was over. And I've talked with the people in the farmers markets, and people aren't coming back in with it because they think the program is over. We did all this investing to get it out there. Something as simple as that can make it disappear.
Now we will turn to Marie for another audience question, where I would really like to compliment now the audience on the excellent questions, and I'm sure we have another one.
Indeed, since Ryan mentioned it, and we have a number of questions on this topic, what do you see as the main opportunities and challenges for advancing single-payer health care in Massachusetts during the next legislative session?
We will begin with Ryan.
I'll be honest with you, I think the biggest challenge to single-payer health care is the health insurance industry, which is why you're not supposed to clap. If I did it, I would get into wicked trouble, so I don't want you to get I think we have too much money in politics. You see the same thing play out with fossil fuels. Look what happened with the climate bill that got into conference committee and then got totally watered down. And it had to do with the influence of business interests in Beacon Hill. We need to fight that systemically if we care about doing things that are hard to do. And getting single-payer health care is hard to do. But I can tell you that if we push for it, I believe Massachusetts can make it happen. We've been a leader on so many other things. And I've been surprised, I'll just tell you, I've been surprised at the people who I've spoken to, people who aren't even in favor of raising the minimum wage. I'm in favor of raising the minimum wage. But I heard them say that, and I said, well, what do you think about single-payer health care? I thought they were going to say, no way, that's too liberal or something. They were totally in favor of it because it really will help small businesses as much as it will help, struggling families who don't have access to affordable health care. We need to fight for this. I will fight for this. It's not enough that we have a law in Massachusetts that says everyone should have health insurance. That's different from saying everyone should have affordable quality health care. We can do it, but we have to have some political leadership and courage to make it happen. And I think if we work with the community, I see healthcare activists who I know in the audience tonight, we can do it.
Thank you. Joe, the question on single-payer health care comes to you.
So single-payer health care, universal Medicare for all, is one of my main campaign priorities. And you know, what I've said to folks as I've been meeting in community settings is that not only am I going to immediately sponsor this Senate 619, but I'm going to fight for it. And the time for single payer has come. Right now, healthcare is about 40% of the Commonwealth's budget. But it's not just a state issue. Cities and towns are having groaning budget problems in large part because of spiraling healthcare control. But that's not only the issue, because individuals with higher premiums, higher copays, and higher prescription drugs, you know, it's absolutely unsustainable. So the opportunity here is actually for a paradigm shift where we begin to say in the Commonwealth, and it would be my job as state senator, that we have to have a people-centered healthcare, not a profit-centered healthcare. So we have to shift that paradigm, and we have to begin again in strategic settings working with community activists to get out the volumes of information we know about the financial efficacy of single payer. There is a recent paper produced by a UMass professor that actually chronicles the kinds of savings that we could foresee if we made the bold, unequivocal leap to single payer. And that's something that I really want to fight for and get done.
Thank you. Steve?
The biggest thing that's going to stop it is lobbyists. If you don't see how strong they are and how manipulative they are, look at the new thing for the nurses. We're looking to get nurses. My mother was a nurse. Nurses are what make patients better, and they want a ratio that's reasonable and doable. And now you hear ads that the commercials are making it sound like nurses don't have control. The government is going to do it. No, the nurses are the ones who want it. But that's what we're up against when we go to single payer. And any of us that ends up getting elected, if we're pushing for single payer like I'm going to, we're going to have a lot of pushback from those companies to not get reelected. That's what a lot of our legislators have faced. We have one who's just recently leaving who found it that he couldn't quite grasp it for the longest time. And then just a couple of years ago, he said, you know, I thought I'd never get here, but I'm now a believer in single payer. And that was John Sybeck. Now he's retiring. But we can convince people of it, but the biggest fight is going to be lobbyists and those commercials. The other thing I would make sure is that from now on, let's treat physical injuries and mental injuries and brain injuries all the same. The idea that people with mental disabilities don't get the same treatment, the same reimbursement through insurance, and even through Mass Health that others do, I think needs to end.
Chelsea, we'll end this question with you.
I firmly believe that healthcare is a human right. And I also firmly believe that single-payer healthcare has all of the elements that we need. It guarantees access, it ensures quality, and it cuts costs. One of the major impediments that I see to actually making this happen is to prove that all three of those things happen when there's single-payer healthcare. Although Senator Jamie Eldridge has already thought of that, and he has put forth a bill that examines the way that all different kind of healthcare systems work in order to prove that single-payer healthcare is actually cost-effective. He actually has endorsed me as a candidate, and I am hoping to be working with him shoulder to shoulder on making sure that we can move single-payer healthcare forward. I also believe that there's some baby steps that we can take now. We can cap the costs of prescription drugs now. We can work on telemedicine, which would benefit our rural neighbors and our low-income neighbors so they don't end up in the ER. We can also work on community hospital pricing, and we can demand to know the answers about why small hospitals are getting reimbursed at a lower rate than the larger hospitals. And we can also stand with our frontline workers. We can support safe staffing limits and a workplace violence prevention bill. All of these things, all at once, will be part of strengthening our healthcare system and working for single-payer healthcare, which we absolutely need.
Thank you. Stan, you have another question for the group?
Staying on the health theme, what has been missing so far from the state's response to the opioid epidemic that you would advocate for as a state senator?
Mm-hmm. We will begin this round with Joe.
When I first came to Western Massachusetts, as I mentioned before, I ran a crisis intervention outreach team, and we focused on addiction, and not only addiction writ large, we focused on the root causes of addiction. What we're seeing now with the opioid crisis is that times 10, and it's ripping not only through this community, but of course it's a national problem. What I've been inspired by is the opioid task force in Franklin County. Now, I'm proud to say that I've been endorsed by District Attorney David Sullivan and John Merrigan, who together with many others like Ruth Pody, who has endorsed me, have started this opioid task force. It is a model not only for the Commonwealth, but for the nation. And what I believe the legislature must do is look at what's happening right now in Greenfield with drug diversion courts, peer-to-peer mentorship, recovery coaches, and the kind of advocacy for sustained treatment beds. That bundle of necessity needs not only to be a Greenfield-centered piece of work, we need to export that model, which is proving not only to reduce opioid fatalities, but it's proving now to stop this cycling back into using. So it's proving not only to be useful for the community of Greenfield, but it could have exponential impact in the Commonwealth and also nationally. So invest there, don't make them fight for their money as they have, and actually send this model out through the Commonwealth and the nation.
Thank you. Steve, we'll go to you.
I think what everybody is missing is the root cause of the addiction. Helplessness, people going through trauma. I work with veterans in a veteran treatment court that we started down in Holyoke. I worked with Dave Sullivan to help that get on board. And what it is you've got people who either get a physical injury, an emotional, moral injury, or a mental injury. And they treat themselves when nobody else will treat them. If you don't try to help them, they're going to help themselves the best they can. And this is what they're given. I've had veterans come home, or they've gone to Germany, they had an injury, were given painkillers, sent back because they wanted to go back. They were back in another IED, go back to Germany, they gave them more painkillers. Then they came home, the VA gave them painkillers. And then a directive came down and said, no more painkillers. We're going to give you aspirin. And guess what? They turned to heroin. They turned to writing their own prescriptions. They turned to stealing it. Those are the people that we need to address. And those are the veterans. Don't tell me there's not people in our own communities that go through trauma. I've lived with people and I've lived my own trauma. If you don't have supports there, you're going to find something to make you feel better. That's the underlying cause. We have to address people's trauma before anything else. Thank you.
Thank you. Chelsea?
What I think is missing is compassion. I think that people who are struggling with addiction are often treated like they're criminals, and they're really facing a disease. So that's where I start from. That's how I approach viewing addiction and the struggles that people are having. When I was a teenager, I volunteered in a clean needle assembly kit place, a clean needle exchange, because I strongly believe in harm reduction. And if someone is struggling with a disease of addiction, then they should at least be able to access clean needles so that they are not also contracting other diseases while they're needing to use. I also really believe that we need treatment across the care continuum. We need prevention. We need to be looking out for people and as you said, thinking about the trauma and being aware of that too. And we have so many kids that are going into the foster care system because they are losing parents to addiction, either through overdose death or because they are needing to be in treatment, and that's unacceptable to me. I believe that we need more beds. I believe that we need more Narcan and access, and I also really believe that we need safe injection facilities so that people can have connections with caregivers so that they can start to maybe begin a relationship there and maybe start some treatment. And if they actually overdose, then they're in a safe place and the death can be prevented. I realize that, something that, I just ran out of time. Thank you.
Thank you. Ryan?
I think this is a cliche, but you look around the room, you see people, pardon me, who've been affected directly or indirectly by this opioid crisis. And I think we've gotten to a point, which is probably a good point to be at, where every legislative session there is a major bill, at least one, on this issue. In the same way there's a major bill on climate and controlling healthcare costs, this is something that is going to keep going on and on. And I sometimes feel it's like squeezing a water balloon or something like that, because you always discover new dimensions of it. For example, there was an interesting report that came out last week that said among those most affected by addiction are those in high injury industries, like farmers, like people in the construction industry, people who go to work when they're in pain, and so they'll rely on opioids to get them through as opposed to seeking health care. So I'd like to make sure, this is another argument for single-payer health care, actually. It's certainly an argument for amending the state's earned sick time law to make sure that more people have access to sick time so they can go to the doctor when they need to. But I think we need experimentation on a regular, recurring basis and funding. I have no problem with experimenting with supervised injection facilities. I have no problem experimenting with new ways to help people in certain industries. That's essential because it's going to take a long-term commitment. Sometimes in politics, that's hard to get. Politicians kind of see until the election and that's it, but this is a long-term issue.
Thank you. So there is so much active listening going on in this hall. I would like to call just a beat for a moment of a ninth inning stretch. So if you need to fidget, fidget. If you need to get up, get up. We will hold it 60 seconds.
That's a great idea.
Okay.
That means we're halfway through.
Yeah, I was just going to say we must have, what, 6 more questions?
Okay, now I'm calling 30 seconds until we sit down.
It's hard to get us to know to set it back down.
So let's take our seats again.
Oh, 30 seconds. If you're going for hot dogs, get me one.
Okay, counting down. 15 seconds. Okay, will you be seated
thank you.
again, please?
Oh.
And we will resume.
Oh. Very sweet, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Do we need water?
And for that, we will go to another audience question.
Another audience question.
Marie, are you ready?
Hey, this is good. I love this.
Now I'm ready. The state has little, if any, economic development programs for small businesses in Western Mass unless you're a major manufacturer. How do you plan to assist small businesses in this area?
We will begin with Steve.
I'm sorry, can you ask that question? I couldn't hear you very well.
Sure. The state has little, if any, economic development programs for small businesses in Western Mass unless you're a major manufacturer. How do you plan to assist small businesses in this area?
So again, in Western Massachusetts, a lot of the small businesses that we have are around agriculture. I think we need to work with the state to do even better in providing training and access to soil development, everything like that, through the University of Massachusetts and through our Greenfield Community College. The other thing is allowing people get some support as they transition. So this, it's been so many days I can't even keep track, but we've started a new week. Last week I went through Diamond Farm, which used to be Diamond Egg Farm, but because of new law about cage-free eggs and things like that, that was no longer sustainable for the operation that they had because of the physical plant that they were dealing with. And that family has slowly turned it around to doing something besides eggs, and they're working on turkeys and raising turkeys and the different things that go with that. But she needs, or they need, as much support as they can from the state, and it might be more grants as they make that transition when we pass laws, it affects our small businesses, and that would be one of those things in the agriculture of Western Massachusetts.
Thank you. Chelsea?
I think that instead of spending hundreds of millions of dollars in tax breaks for big corporations, we can actually invest that money in our small businesses. They are what make us special and strong and unique out here, and they deserve our support. I also see having single-payer healthcare as something that will cut down costs for all of us and allow small businesses to not feel the pressure or not feel the pinch when they're getting fees from above and also having to pay for the EMAC for their employees. Lots of small businesses are getting really squeezed in that way. And I also think we need public transportation so that employees can actually get to their jobs and they can keep these small businesses running. And of course, we need affordable housing so that people can actually live close to their jobs. And that would make life easier for small businesses in every which way. Thank you.
Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, again, use Orange as an example. Rodney Hunt goes out of business a couple of years ago, or not out of business, but moves jobs out of state. You lose 200 jobs. It's devastating for the region. I think this is one where there's no silver bullet solution. I think what helps business thrive is you lower costs for them. You make it easier for them to make investments. And that means affordable housing. It means adequate transportation. You know, we hear a lot about East-West Rail, which I support, hopefully from Pittsfield to Springfield to Boston, opening up a whole market to the east. I actually think North-South Rail is important too. But let me tell you that I think this is a little bit pie in the sky, but I think we don't just need one East-West Rail project. We need two. We should have what we used to have, which is a train link from Fitchburg to Orange to Greenfield. And that may be very ambitious and long-term, but what I want to do is balance a long-term vision for really revolutionary economic development with steps we can take today. The state senator for this district has to fight really hard and be a partner with cities and towns to just put in broadband. I mean, there are some rural communities where young people don't live there, you know, or that's how people feel anyway, that we're losing young people, that people don't want to come back and start businesses there because the bottom line is the economy is changing. We just talked about Walmart earlier and big box stores, large stores like that. We can't just compete with those. The service economy of our state is important as well.
And Joe?
I was excited about some of the provisions that passed in the recent economic development bill in the Massachusetts State Senate. Among them, and this was led by Senator Lesser, Eric Lesser to the south, who is the architect of the East-West Rail from Springfield. Among them were very targeted business developments for small communities, for abandoned buildings in different sectors. I think the legislature needs that kind of nuanced economic development legislation where we not only look at a tax base and needing to bring in more jobs to places that are losing jobs and population, but start to incentivize in sectors and in areas that we want more employment and we want more economic development investment. And then in terms of rail, I'm very excited about the East-West Rail. Of course, the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission and Senator Lesser have really jump-started that from Springfield. You know, and I'm also really grateful to Reps Kulik and Kokot who got us the North-South Rail started, but really we need to link Boston along Route 2. It is essential for our Northern Valley that has lost jobs and population, and it will not only allow people to work in Boston, but it will allow people who live in Boston potentially to actually do a reverse commute, right? And all of a sudden our economy begins to shift along the Route 2 and the Springfield corridor. And so, you know, in bringing us closer to Boston that way, we will be able to not only develop businesses through state law, but also develop businesses by, in fact, through transportation, getting closer and closer to us.
Thank you. Stan, you have another question.
This is a two-part question. Massachusetts recently became the 14th state in the country to adopt automatic voter registration. What other voting reforms are among your priorities? That's the first part. And who do you support in the Democratic primary for Secretary of State, who is the person in charge of elections, the incumbent, William Galvin, or the challenger, Josh Zakum?
Chelsea, we will begin with you.
Well, as far as the ways that we can also sort of open up our government, I really strongly believe in ranked choice voting. I believe that it brings more voices into our political process. I believe that it ensures outcomes that more accurately reflect the will of the voters. It allows people to run nicer campaigns. They're kinder to each other because they're not all vying for that first place spot. And vote splitting is eliminated, and it increases the diversity of candidates. And I think that's something that's attainable. It's something that we can work for very soon. There's some great positive models around the country already. I mean, I think it's been used for, 77 years in Cambridge already. It's also being used in Minnesota. So we have some evidence that it really does work, and that's something that I think would be very, very helpful for us at the state and also at the federal level. And also the debacle that happened in 2016 probably would have been circumvented if we had ranked choice voting, which I am strongly mournful of. And as far as the second part of the question, I'm still thinking about it, and I'm excited that there's some great choices for that election. I sidestepped.
Ryan, your turn.
I'd like to echo that sidestep. No, this is something that's very important to me. And in my professional life, I didn't come out of the womb as a city councilor. I used to work for nonprofit organizations, and one of them was Common Cause. I was actually the executive director of Common Cause in the state of Maryland, where I lived after I graduated from UMass for a few years. I worked for a group called Fair Vote as well on ranked choice voting, and well, I would love to see us abolish the Electoral College, by the way. That would be nice. Our federal situation might be in a little better situation now. I don't propose to do that as a state senator, but that shows you, I think, where my values lay. Every vote should be equal. Everyone should have an equal chance to participate. Let me give you a couple local things. I think that we should have an expansion of early voting. You may note that there is no early voting for this primary. And I also think that cities and towns should have the option of having early voting if they wish for their local elections. Because again, the more opportunities we have for people to come out and vote, the better. At the end of the day, I really want you to, what I want to try to be as a senator who fights for reform. Because the ideals that we care about cry out for it. It's going to be hard to get single-payer health care. It's going to be hard to fight climate change unless we get money out of politics. We need to reform the system. So let's not forget about that as we work to those things. Whatever you care about, work for reform at the same time.
Thank you. Joe?
Well, I let out a big cheer when I heard that we won automatic voter registration in this Commonwealth. I think we're number 14 in the country of states able to do this. 700,000 potential new voters will come onto the rolls. So I think the only thing stronger than money in politics is an informed, active, and engaged electorate. The vote is more powerful than money. It is the thing that we need in the Commonwealth to hold lawmakers accountable for the kind of policies we've been talking about tonight. So I also really am a big fan of ranked choice voting. I think it's essential. We know what it does, right? It allows for more candidates to come onto the scene because more people, it's not necessarily a question of, oh, you're going to spoil the election. We recognize that the electoral system is spoiled, right? So we get more candidates, then thus raising more ideas. I think we need same-day voter registration. Study after study shows the kind of barriers that breaks down in the electorate. I think we need public financing of elections. It cannot be that someone's wealth determines whether or not they are able to run for an office. It is imperative that the public begin to finance elections in the Commonwealth. And when we begin to see this open and new 21st century electorate, I believe that's the foundation of the kind of work we're going to be able to do together in the state legislature.
Secretary of State.
Thank you. My Secretary of State choice, right now I'm actually very interested in Josh Zakem. I think he has some very new ideas, and I think he's built a great base of support for himself and a great knowledge base. So I'm looking at him very favorably currently.
Steve, we will end this round with you.
Thank you. The idea of same-day voter registration, I think, is also a great idea. I'm very in favor of changing our primary system, that it's party-oriented. It's kind of like a semi-public, semi-private kind of endeavor, whether we're talking nationally or even locally. I think we need to have all campaigns run through public finance, and we've got to reduce the amount of time that both our national candidates run for, and in some ways even our own. It goes on too long. It makes it too hard for people who want to run for office. I find how challenging it is for myself and still have my job. I think about other people who have 2 jobs and they have some great ideas and they'll never get out there because they're never going to be able to get to raise the money to ever run for office. So I think we need to go to public funding of elections. And as far as the Secretary of State, I still haven't decided. I had leaned one way and somebody went through a tirade of telling me why I shouldn't go that way. So I said, well, I'm going to have to go back and revisit Mr. Galvin's positions again to see if I can go back to supporting him. So I do not know how I want to do this yet.
Marie, an audience question, please.
There's a number of questions on climate, so I'm going to combine a few. The climate action bill that passed in the legislature was deficient. What more is needed? Which specific actions will you take to address climate change?
Climate change. We will start with you, Ryan.
I think the bill that passed, like I said earlier, was a little watered down. I think we need to be more aggressive on increasing the renewable portfolio standard in law. Look, just to back up, climate change is an emergency. And we have legislators across the country, and certainly in Congress, some of whom don't even acknowledge that it's real, but many of whom don't acknowledge just how urgent it is to take action on this. So if I'm trying to communicate anything to you, it's that I'm a legislative realist. You know, maybe it comes from being a city councilor. When someone tells me they have a pothole, I don't say, well, I'm going to convene a study commission for the pothole, and after a 3-year period, we'll come back with a recommendation. You just try and fix it. So when it comes to something as urgent as climate change, any action is good action, but I have to say I'm disappointed that the legislature was not more forceful and ambitious in requiring more wind and solar investments, and in particular, something that's very important is battery storage technology. You can't have a flourishing wind and solar power system unless you have the ability to store the energy and use it at certain times. We need to transform our energy system in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and I favor a carbon fee as one of the main ways to do that. I'd like to see it mostly, although not entirely, revenue neutral. And if we take these bold steps, I mean, that's what we have to do right now, and as your state senator, that's what I will fight for.
Thank you, Joe.
We've put more carbon into the atmosphere since 1989 than in all of history that preceded it. What happened in the legislature was really actually an outrage at the end of this session. The Senate energy bill had very good measures, many of which were not adopted. Among them, we had a renewable portfolio standard that would have jumped to 3%, a 3% increase annually. It is imperative that utilities are forced to push Class 1 renewables of wind and solar through to customers. It is imperative. If we do not get climate change right, the rest of history will be a footnote. The other thing we must do is carbon fee and rebate. I support actually a bifurcated model. I would support passing some of that, so we're not paying right now, as folks know, the true cost of carbon at the pump. That would disincentivize the use of carbon, which we must do, but it would also help us recoup some revenue. We import $20 billion of fossil fuels into the Commonwealth annually. We put a price on carbon, we send half of it back to small communities, middle and income families who can't afford that flat tax, we bank half of it. And it goes to startup businesses and investments, it goes to new technology, it goes to jobs, and we begin transitioning our economy here in the Commonwealth, which we must and can do. And so we start incentivizing things like solar panels on people's roofs and more green energy. I'm gonna stop. I want to go on and on about this.
Thank you. Thank you for
90
restraining
seconds really
yourself.
isn't very long.
I want to talk about climate.
Steve,
Obviously, it's renewables. We have to move as best we can to wind and solar as fast as we can. Otherwise, we're not going to be successful. Oops, sorry. The other thing that, you know, this is kind of a throwback, but we're still there, folks. We need to conserve. We need to not have that air conditioner on full blast, whether it's your business and go to them, or whether it's your home. We also keep our thermostats lower. I know it sounds old-fashioned, but we don't need all the energy that we use. We're wasting it. We're also looking at recycling and reuse of things. Well, let's bring that stuff local. Let's not ship it to China on ships that are using nothing but diesel to get it over there and dumping things in our oceans. There's practical things we can go back to, but we also need to really, the state has to increase greatly the use of renewables into our grids. And I think it would also be important to try to reduce the amount of large grids and get it down to small, local grids, as we have with some of the communities in Western Mass, and I think a lot of us could do it. I know the big industries, the energy companies aren't going to like it, but I think that's, we should incentivize as much as that as possible. Thank you.
thank you, Chelsea. We'll end this question with you.
What a sad state of affairs that people were just excited that there was any mention of the environment in the latest budget. And yes, so many things fell off, then were not passed. The good news was that there was an increase for offshore wind, which is exciting because I really believe that we need to diversify our green energy options here. And also the MMRC, which is the minimum monthly reliability charge, which is, it takes into account somebody's sort of average use of consumption, not just their highest cost. So this is for people who use renewables. So those were the good news things that happened. Those are tiny things, and that's not enough. We need leaders who are going to urgently and desperately address these issues. I strongly, strongly believe that access to clean energy is a human right, and I strongly believe that protecting the planet is an urgent moral imperative. We have got to address this now. So I think that, like I said, we need a diverse array of green energy options. We need to invest in a green economy here. That includes job creation and being on the forefront of creating these jobs and being part of the green economy. We used to have some of the strongest climate mandates in the country, second only really to California and New York. And we are most certainly falling behind, and I think that's unacceptable. So I believe that we need to push for energy efficiency standards for appliances. I believe we need to invest in electric vehicle infrastructure up and down 91, make it more realistic for everyday people to have electric vehicles. I believe we need to invest in our public transportation even more. And I have more to say, but I'm done.
Stan, you have another question for us.
The legislature earlier this year approved and the governor signed into law a major package of criminal justice reforms. Was there anything in the package that you disagree with, and what was left out that you would have sought as a state senator?
We'll start with Joe.
I thought of that April criminal justice bill as a good first step, but insufficient. So some of the things that I really, I think we have to all remember that part of what we have to do here in the Commonwealth is we have to reverse generations of failed drug war policies and the criminalization of addiction, and actually the criminalization of poverty and over-criminalization of people of color, right? These are systemic ills that we are beginning to chip away on, and that bill started to. So, for example, it started to chip away at mandatory minimum sentencing, which by and large is, ties the hands of judges and is proven to be implemented in a disproportionately impacting and affecting communities of color. So it began to do that. It didn't go far enough. It didn't actually look at how many people we have incarcerated basically effectively for life. It turns out we're the 5th largest state. We have the highest percentage. We're the 5th state with the highest percentage of folks who are effectively incarcerated for their lives. And we really need to look at that. didn't really look at the way in which we must decriminalize addiction even further. So it needs a greater emphasis on drug diversion courts. And it needs to actually address the school to prison pipeline. Right now, we're not making the connection between high school dropout rates and the eventual entanglement with law enforcement and incarceration. We need legislation that begins to make that tie, especially in poor communities and communities of color.
Steve?
I don't know why I took those off. I couldn't read it. Our criminal justice system, I go in. I have been in 3 of the state's penitentiaries and met with the inmates. I've gone into our local Hampshire County Jail, and I meet with people coming out. And there are so many issues that they face when they come out to then stay out before coming back in, that it doesn't take a genius to figure out why there's so much recidivism on it. We are not addressing people's traumas. People who have a traumatic brain injury, whether it happens when they are 18 and they're in war, or it happened when they were 6 and they were on a playground. People have to understand the science isn't all there yet, but we've got to work on it, because what happens to those people is behavior changes and misunderstandings. Also with emotional trauma and psychological trauma, you'll find, I swear, as they do the studies, you're going to find our jails, our prisons are filled with people who, the choices that they made, the things that they made, often were made under circumstances of trauma, physical or mental, and we need to address that. Otherwise, we're just going to keep filling the jails with people all the time. Thank you.
So let's go to Ryan.
I think we have to ask ourselves what the purpose of the criminal justice system is. I just never believed that it was for retribution or punishment alone. I think the greater value of the policy decisions we make as a Commonwealth lie in making compassionate decisions about how we are all going to thrive together as a society. And for those who are on this track, frankly, not everyone gets an equal shake in life, and there are people who are far more likely to be incarcerated than others. I think our policy choices have to be sensitive to that. So it's good progress to begin dismantling mandatory minimums. It's some progress on eliminating money bail and this kind of thing. These things that target people economically, socially, and racially. But like I said before, this is one of those things that you can't solve in a session. And I don't think anyone thought you could. This is going to be like healthcare or climate change or opioids, which of course has a connection to all this, doesn't it? That we're going to have to continually revisit year in and year out, check our best practices, and keep going, because, trust me, there is injustice in the criminal justice system today. And we need to dedicate all our energies to, over time, reducing that and becoming a better society, because the system isn't there to punish people. It's there to protect us and to rehabilitate and help people have good lives.
Thank you. Chelsea?
One of my main takeaways was that medically assisted treatment, or MAT, is now permitted in jails. And that is, of course, a good start, but it seems totally overdue. If you're going to bring someone who is experiencing addiction into the criminal justice system and not allowing them to have the training wheels or the support of medically assisted treatment so that they can hopefully get off of the drug that they're addicted to, then that seems cruel and inhumane to me. So that was a great first start. But I see our criminal justice system as becoming more and more of a catch-all. If we don't have comprehensive mental health services for people, then people who are dealing with mental illness and trauma and some of the pain of life are ending up in jails, are ending up in cages. That's unacceptable to me, really. I think that we need to stop criminalizing poor people. We need to stop criminalizing people of color, and we need to stop really just putting people in cages really willy-nilly, because I think, like I said, it's becoming somewhat of a catch-all. And I think if we have more comprehensive services for people across the lifespan, and certainly with mental health care, then we can sort of stop the flow of people going into jails.
Thank you. Marie, we have an audience question now. Please.
I do, and I'm going to try to combine a few of these together under a loose umbrella of poverty, equity. I only have 2 questions left, so I want to get all this in. But Franklin County is the poorest county in the Commonwealth. So can you talk about what you can do as a new state senator? What concrete steps can you take to protect our senior citizens of need who can lose housing because their rental units go up, the inflation and market increases in rent? How can you protect the PVTA, which is losing routes considerably? And also our housing. How can you encourage building more affordable housing for middle to very low income families and individuals? What concrete steps can you do as a state senator to protect our citizens of need?
So we will begin with Steve.
You realize we only have 90 seconds.
Do your best.
Housing is a huge thing that I've been dealing with for most of my career. I had said a little bit before, I can say even more, but it's also smart neighborhood, it's smart design. But oh my goodness, we have programs, people are making lower money than they've ever made before. The 15 is a start, but we used to have people would get benefits and pension. Our seniors no longer have that. They have Social Security, which was only supposed to be 40% of what they were going to need, and now we're expecting people to live on it. I see it every day. I deal with people who are so scared of not being able to pay. I sat with a woman today, 78 years old. She thought, I thought I was going to be gardening at this time. She has a disabled daughter, a disabled son who's an adult, and she's trying to figure out how he's going to survive when she's gone. We have people who are making enormous amounts of money in this country and in this state. They don't need to have all that money. They can give back. They can give it to the people who need it. We didn't run our country and we didn't run our state or our communities like this for the longest time. Why are we letting it happen? Because somebody comes up with a tax code and we have a, I'm sure everybody loved having a tax-free weekend, but do you know what that costs the state? Do you know what it costs that woman who's trying to take care of her adult son? We've got to change this.
Thank you. Ryan, let's hear from you.
Well, I'm also the only candidate who's actually raised people's taxes, sorry. But, you know, I voted on budgets, and that's part of it. That's part of the job. And, you know, you'll have that responsibility in the legislature to one degree or another. So when I've taken tough votes as in my community, I know the people who it affects. And my word of caution to anyone who identifies with what I identify as, which is a progressive Democrat, we need to be very cautious to remember the economic side of this as well. If someone's property tax goes up $200 a year, that's groceries for a month. Remember that. I mean, it's important to fund important services like our schools, public safety, roads, but it's time to change how we do it. We need to shift away from property tax, pursue more progressive solutions, and that'll help some seniors, I think. But you can't just rely on multi-year projects. You need solutions now. So let me give you 2 of them. Public transportation, the PVTA getting cut, the FRTA, no weekend service. It's not just raising taxes on millionaires that will do it. I made a proposal a couple weeks ago, put a 30 to 50 cent fee on Uber and Lyft rides, of which there are 64 million a year in Massachusetts. There's $30 million for regional transit authorities. Housing, how about creating what they call a swanctuary tax on some of the high-rise luxury apartments they're building in Boston to fund land trusts and affordable housing. Even these things out legislatively, there are creative policy solutions that can be done now.
Thank you. Let's go to Chelsea.
I've got 2 answers to this question. Number 1 is, I really believe that we need leaders who have lived experience that actually relates to the people that they will be representing. I was a single teen mother. I was on SNAP benefits. I relied on Mass Health. I had to work multiple jobs. I barely made it. I picked cilantro at farms. I did all sorts of things just to survive. And when I've been serving as a commissioner on the Hampshire and Franklin County Commission on the Status of Women and Girls, I have gone there gone to Beacon Hill to lobby for our area, for the women and girls in Hampshire and Franklin County. And when I've done that work, I have done so in a way that has made myself visible as someone who is average, right? So many people here are struggling, and so many people who are struggling are invisible. The everyday struggles of our everyday people are hidden because they are ashamed. And that's a key part of my candidacy and what sets me apart, because I am pulling back the curtain and making myself visible as a regular person here that has really struggled. And if, God willing, if I'm elected, my very presence in the Senate will prove that when you invest in people at the bottom, when you invest in the little guy, when you invest in vulnerable people, then they turn around and they not only barely survive, but they succeed and they thrive and they give back to their communities. So part of my lived experience will be, and part of my differentiator is to advocate for Western Massachusetts in a totally different way.
Thank you. Joe?
Great question, huge question. And with any huge question, of course, there are short-term answers and then there are long-term answers. So for example, with regard to elders, right now, the University of Massachusetts just put this out. It's a new study. It's called the Elder Economic Security Index. And it turns out that Massachusetts, for elders, is ranked actually second to bottom in the nation, just above Mississippi, for the kind of economic security our elders can expect to age in place with dignity. So there are things that the legislature can do next session to help ease the burden, the economic inequality burden for our seniors. One thing is that we can raise the elder cap, the age cap on the earned income tax credit, which is wildly important for families and could help our seniors if we have that political will, which I do. The other thing is that we could make sure that spouses can be caregivers for elders wanting to age in home. That means the spouse gets money in the home and the families can age in place with dignity. And then we have to talk taxes. Taxes are not some ethereal thing. Taxes are policy. So in Massachusetts, we've systematically lowered the investment income tax from 12% to 5.1%, the personal income tax from 5.95% to 5.1%, and we've at the same time increased the number of corporate tax breaks. Those three things together have meant over time a loss of $3 billion in our Commonwealth's budget. We have to take taxes back in the legislature, and that's something I want to do long haul.
Thank you. Stan, do you have another question that you would like to ask?
One of you will become the new state senator who will replace Stanley Rosenberg, a longtime legislator who had tremendous respect in the district, tremendous success in representing this district, and of course was a Senate president with a huge amount of clout. What is your strategy to serve the district in not exactly the same way that Stan Rosenberg did, but in a way that approximates his success?
Chelsea, we will let you take this one up first.
So I challenged Senator Rosenberg because I believe in participatory democracy. And I believe that debate is healthy for all of us and for our democracy, and it engages voters so that we can check in about what our values are and who can best represent us. And I did so with respect for the work that he had done. And I also did so because I believe that we deserve more out here. I believe that we have a major inequality problem here in Western Mass, and he absolutely agreed with me. We sat down and had a drink, and we talked about how boring our debates would be because we agree that equality is what we need to be working for in Western Massachusetts. And he even signed my nomination papers very kindly, and with sort of, I think, a little bit of, he was impressed by my courage, and he encouraged me and was excited that I was running because we were going to have some interesting, exciting, well, maybe boring debates, actually. But the way that I want to continue his legacy is to be present in our district. And we need leaders with interesting life experiences, with real life experiences, as he had been a foster child, and as I said, I had been a single teen mother. Experiences that open us up to be compassionate to the people in this area and I want to be everywhere in this district, and I have been so far in this campaign, and I will continue to be so and continue to listen and to bring people into the process and into conversation and not be a mouthpiece. I will never be a mouthpiece, but I will bring people into this work with me. Thank you.
Ryan.
Well, I'm not Stan Rosenberg. I'm Ryan O'Donnell, and my website is ryanodonnell.org. But everyone is different, and I think that we very much admire Stan Rosenberg's legislative accomplishments and his commitment to this district for a long time. I mean, if you like the Earned Income Tax Credit, thank Stan Rosenberg. You know, if you believe in marriage equality, thank him for standing up and defending that. I haven't agreed with him on every last issue, but I admire his approach. And so what I would say is this. In my experience as someone on in a small legislature, the city council, you have to know how to work when not everyone agrees with you. And I've been through some contentious fights, some of which have wound up in the newspaper, and not everyone has agreed with me. But after those fights are over, actually after one in recent memory, my colleagues turned around and unanimously supported me to lead the council as council president. So the answer to the question, I think, is Western Massachusetts needs long-term influence, but also someone to stand up for our values. You can do both. They're not mutually exclusive. I will fight for Western Mass, but I'll do it in a way that preserves relationships and respect. And I think the way you do that is by speaking the truth, by paying attention to the policy details before you, and by working respectfully with your colleagues. I believe in the legislative process, and I think that Stan Rosenberg did that well, and in that way I would try to follow his lead.
Thank you. Joe, we will go to you.
You know, the things I loved about Stan's leadership, are probably too many to name here, right? His loyalty to the University of Massachusetts. He also fought for that criminal justice bill we were talking about, which was very important. Of course, marriage equality, and so many other things. The kind of lawmaker Stan was one who actually led both with his heart and his brain at the same time. And he also saw the job of state senator equally as important, divided between constituent services and making sure that the people of this district had what they needed in terms of what government owed them, and used the power of his office to leverage those services. But then he was also a supreme strategist and coalition builder. So he was part of galvanizing this district, which is, of course, far greater than our 24 cities and towns in this Senate district. So Stan locked arms and made plans with the folks to the south and the folks to the north to make sure that we had the power base that we need to leverage and make leverage our interests and needs here and make Western Massachusetts known to our colleagues in Boston. And that's no small task. So I would suggest that someone coming in to this job and picking up the baton from Stan and wanting to run it forward has to be able to do this job on day one. Because right now there are 5 open seats in our district. This is one of them. And so we need that kind of leadership.
Thank you, Steve. We will conclude this question with you.
Stan did a fabulous job, and when I was working, I've worked in everything from childcare to being a janitor to you name it. And many of the places that I went to and organizations that I had belonged to, Stan would show up and Stan would listen. If you had a problem, you called up Stan's office, and I can't tell you how many people have said, Stan called me that night personally. Not because you were a bigwig. I worked at a daycare as a cook, but he wanted to listen. I intend to do, as a state senator, what I've done in my job now. I deal with constituents. I deal with people who have problems, individual problems with state government or federal government, and I get them what they need. If I have enough people who all have the same problem, guess what? That's a problem of legislation or regulation, and we have to approach it that way. And that's when we work on those kinds of issues, when it affects enough of our people in this district. I grew up in Northampton and Florence. I've lived in Whately, Montague, Turners Falls, and in Greenfield. I worked for the United Arc. I know all these communities. I know what it's like to live and send my kids to the schools in those communities. I will be a hell of an advocate if you elect me, just like Stan has been. You take the people what they need, and you go to Boston and get it back for our district.
Thank you. We have 3 questions left. Marie, do you have another distinct question from the audience?
Okay. Yesterday's Boston Globe had an article about the number of states with a full-time legislature. Massachusetts is one of those states. Despite this, Massachusetts was the last state in the union to pass a budget. The article cited several inefficiencies in our legislature. Does this concern you, and if so, what do you plan to do about it?
Ryan, jump in.
I think the legislature needs substantial reform. I recently made a statement that we need to make sure all the conference committees between the House and Senate are public. Right now, at the end of the session, as they're winding down, well, the formal session anyway, that you have a House version of something and a Senate version of something, and they go into a conference committee to hammer out the details, and that happens behind closed doors, and that's why you hear a lot of complaints tonight about an energy bill that was sort of watered down, about no solution on how we fund health care, no overhaul of the foundation budget for public education. That should be opened up. The waiting period between when a legislator retires and becomes a lobbyist should be multiplied by at least 5. It should be at least 5 years, in my opinion. So there are a number of reforms. The budget coming a little late, frankly, concerns me a little less, because we can keep going and it's not really the end of the world. So less than efficiencies, things happening on time. I'd like to have reform so that we have more of a public interest process. The real issue with things coming down to the wire and these committees kind of holding on to legislation and then only tackling them at the end is that if you just act on something at the very end, that's when special interests come and sort of get their hands on things. So I believe in robust legislative reform. It's hard to do. I think, frankly, both chambers are a little bit too much top-down. I'd like to open it up, but again, I'm a reformer. If you want a reformer who's going to be there and fight to change the way Beacon Hill works, I hope you'll consider me.
Joe, your thoughts?
The issue with the late budget is one that I used to look at a lot when I was ED of National Priorities Project. It actually seizes up the ability of agencies that depend on the funds from government to be able to plan. And so, it causes that kind of magnified chaos. So I was concerned that the legislature wasn't able to pass a budget. I do think that we also need the kind of transparency within committees so that when decisions are made, we can hold lawmakers accountable. I'd like to be held accountable. I'd like my vote and my actions in committee to be understood publicly so that I have to own them. But more than that, more than the kind of efficiency in a budget process or efficiency and transparency and accountability in committees, we need a legislature that understands 3 things, that understands the impact of the funding over time, so that when the legislature passes a piece of legislation and economies change over time, that legislation is not so rigid and it can be nimble so that agencies can have legislation and rules that ebb and flow. It needs legislation that is more people-centered, right? Our legislature is a bit divorced from the folks most affected by, I'm not going to get to 3, by the decision, and I'll try to close and weave in my 3rd.
Thank you. Steve, weigh in.
The biggest thing that we can do in state government is to increase transparency. Plain and simple, we have to see who's making decisions and why they're being made a lot better than what we do. With these conference committees, they go in and something comes out. I know people say they don't like to see legislation made because it's sausage, but I'd like to see it. The other thing I think that would be really important is we're so Boston-centric because that's where the State House is. Getting the committees that hear on bills that affect us in Western Mass, they should be out here having that hearing, not at the State House. They can come out here when it affects our population more than anybody else. I think that would come a long way to get people in an auditorium like this to sit there and be able to look at the legislators and say, you know what, when you make this decision, you pass this law, this is how it's going to affect me. and have that person who is sitting in there that's going to get hurt by it, and let the legislators see that and feel that. We've got to feel what those decisions are going to be. If you stay in that State House, you're not going to know how it's affecting people. I think that would come a long way to improve how our state government runs.
And Chelsea, add your views.
I also agree that we need to be opening up these processes so that they are more visible to everyday people and they're more understandable to people. And I also believe that we need leaders who are not establishment people, that don't owe any favors, that are not part of the status quo, that are authentic leaders with lived experience that can relate to the people that they will be serving. I also believe that we need leaders that are not willing to bargain with the things that matter to this district, and that's what happens in the 11th hour. There's things that fall through the cracks, right, because they're used as bargaining chits, and that's not acceptable to me. It broke my heart that the protections for immigrants were stripped out of the budget at the last hour, and that seemed like it was purposeful. And there wasn't much time or space to repair those things. So that is, like I said, it's totally unacceptable to me. So I think that we need more channels for people to see what's happening and more opportunities for people to come into the process. And we need leaders that are willing to hold regular town halls and regular conversations with people, and maybe even utilize technology so that regular constituents and voters can see what's happening and be part of the conversation, and to raise issues and to know what's coming down the pike and be in constant conversation and constant communication with our leaders so that it's not happening in a vacuum on the other side of the state.
So Marie, we have 2 questions left. Would you like to take 2 more from the audience, or shall we ask Stan to add a final question?
Yeah, definitely audience.
Oh, I think we have an answer
Oh,
here.
audience is
Yes,
weighing
yes,
in.
audience, yes.
Audience is weighing in on audience, so.
Okay. You can ask them.
All right, this is an audience question.
Thank you, Stan.
Going back to Stan Rosenberg, was a great supporter of the arts in Western Massachusetts. What will you do to support growth of arts and culture in the district?
Joe, take it away.
Well, this is a little-known fact about me, but I actually started my life as a professional actress. I had the acting bug, and I worked in New York City. What I learned very quickly was that while I could love theater, and I did, and I mostly did stage because I was a tragedy in commercials and film, but I did stage, and I did it, off-Broadway and nationally, and what I learned as I was, of course, teaching in schools and working, actually, I ran a women's shelter for a year, homeless shelter. As I learned that I loved theater so much, and I saw the transformative part of theater, I realized that I could love theater and believe in the arts as transformative agents, but I didn't have to do it for a business. And so that's what actually led me into social work, actually, in my life. So I know I have lived as an artist in New York City. I know what art does in education. I know what art does across conflict. I know what art does to seed new and important ideas. So I feel like I can bring my whole heart to this question. And clearly part of it is access to funding. And so I would, of course, support the grants for artists through the legislature. But another is actually having a state senator that understands the power of art. And that I feel like I can do, with my whole heart and soul. What's true is that often the problems we face are intractable, but art can help us solve them.
So let's see if there are any other artists, performing or otherwise, in this fine bevy of candidates. Steve.
So I just decided that Joe and I are going to do a show together. I'm a trained actor myself. I got my degree, a bachelor's degree in individual concentration on theater with special populations. And how that came was I wanted to be an actor. I went to California, figured out I wasn't going to quite make it to that extent. I ended up working at a center called the Creative Center in the beautiful town of Visalia in the Central Valley. But I started as a CETA worker. I don't know if anybody remembers those. But I ended up being a theater director in that program for people who had been deinstitutionalized. They were adults, and it was amazing, the creativity. For a couple of my campaign events, I walked around with some of the artwork that people had done. I even did Romeo and Juliet with somebody who with Down syndrome, and she was fabulous as Juliet, let me tell you. The power of art is amazing. I wanted to do a career of doing that, to allow people to express themselves, advocate for themselves. At the time, everybody was saying, well, you want it to be therapy because then you can make a job out of it. And I'm like, no, I want it to be advocacy. I wanted it to be a release for them. I had those altruistic values, and I came home and I got my degree and I was going to start it, and then my son was born, and then another one. So I ended up doing other things, worked at a daycare, and now I'm a veteran service officer. But the arts are crucial to everybody's existence.
Chelsea.
Well, I am the daughter of a sculptor, and I'm also married to a sculptor. And I watched my father live for his art and live way below the poverty line. And I think that's actually far too common for many artists. And I see my husband try to protect the dreams of a lot of the young people that he teaches at Hampshire College who aspire to be professional artists, and he wants to, of course, build them up and also share the realities that being an artist for a living is almost impossible unless you're a millionaire already. So the way that I see it, the way that we can support the arts is, of course, strengthen them in our schools, of course, fund our programs in the area, our cultural programs in the colleges, so that we can continue to bring artists here and have many different cultural experiences, and that keeps us viable and strong and a destination point, right? So I want to be increasing our tourism here. We have so many artists that live here, and if we can increase our transportation options so that people can easily come here, artists can come and visit, tourists can come and see the artists that we have here, and they can buy the art, and that will actually make that a viable career possibility for people if they're able to keep creating and sell their work to people from outside of this area that might come here from New York or Boston or whatever. And I also think that we need, of course, broadband internet so that artists can share their work and have a website and sell things online on Etsy or eBay or things like that. So I see all these interconnected pieces about how we can support the arts here.
Ryan, weigh in on the arts.
Okay. There are many meaningless buzzwords in politics, but the creative economy is not one of them. It's actually a real thing, and it has a real economic meaning for our district in Western Massachusetts in particular. We've seen some great success stories. I think in addition to improving the basics, transportation and housing costs and that kind of thing, I like to see us be equally creative. This is about creativity in our society. Let's have creativity in our legislature. There's some interesting things we can look at doing. I mentioned land trusts before. For affordable housing. I also like the idea of arts trusts. There's one in Northampton, which is actually it's kind of a unique model. This is the idea of giving people art space where they wouldn't normally be able to afford it. I like the idea of exploring new funding mechanisms, maybe even looking at an option for cities and towns to amend their Community Preservation Act if they wish to give a small percentage for community art projects. These are things we can experiment with. But at the end of the day, the creative economy can actually be a solution. When we talk about some of these economic development challenges that we talked about before, let's not forget that. And I'll be a state senator who knows how important this is. I grew up here, and I've seen a lot of towns change. And I've seen a lot of the positive change come because of investment in the creative economy. So I'll be right there with you on that one.
Thank you. Final question from the audience.
Okay. What is it you have learned from young people about what issues are important to them and what they want to see you accomplish to get their vote?
Wonderful. Steve, will you begin?
I can't quite translate everything that baby is saying, but I'm hearing it. Just to let you know. I have children who are now, the youngest one just turned 26. He's now off my insurance, so we have all that struggles. He discovered he had diabetes at 25. The timing wasn't good. But they are looking for the same things that we kind of are. They would love to have a single-payer healthcare system. I really believe that that is a fundamental right. And most of the time I talk with people, I met with a group at Northampton High School, the social justice club that they had, and I, along with a friend of mine who was a formerly homeless veteran, who had been homeless for years, had been in prison, whatever, we went and we talked to them. And they were so fascinated with what we were talking about and how important. They agree with me that housing is also a right. Healthcare is a right. The things that we need to get by in life, I don't understand why we can't just provide it. We all need healthy food. We all need health care and mental health care when needed. And we all need a roof over our heads for stability and safety. People that I've talked to, even my own children, who kind of like roll their eyes when I put on my Sunday morning news programs, all feel that our government can do a lot better by them in this state, and I'd like to help do that.
Thank you. Chelsea.
So I've been working with the Civil Liberties and Public Policy Project at Hampshire College for a long time. I started as a student organizer and continued to work with them through the years. And they have an annual lunch with intergenerational activists. And I bring my daughter there, who's 21. And we talk about how having young activists in our lives keeps us on the radical edge. It keeps us from being stagnant. It keeps us questioning, and it keeps us always listening to what young people care about. I'm very proud that many of the volunteers on my campaign and my staff are also very young, and they keep me on the radical edge, and they keep me questioning, and they definitely make me realize that they're the ones that are leading the charge, and that we should be listening very carefully to them. So I hear that they want safety from gun violence everywhere, and this is essential. I hear that they want to lower the voting age, which I'm excited about and I agree with. And I also hear that they want medically accurate, scientifically accurate sexual health information in our schools. And I also hear that they want to be part of or leading the charge on a movement to be inclusive and aware of gender diversity and relationship models that are diverse, and that we are on the brink of some really exciting cutting-edge things as far as gender and as far as leading the way in Massachusetts as a real progressive model, and the way that we respect different family structures, and the way that we respect different expressions of gender and sexuality.
Ryan.
I believe I'm the youngest person running in this race, and I don't see that as a liability. I see that as an opportunity. I think a new perspective on Beacon Hill, representing this state Senate district, could be a good thing. And that's for myself. I know others bring many good things to this race as well. But a new generation, I think, is healthy in our democracy and for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Let me bring up a very obvious one. I graduated UMass in 2002. I had about $20,000 worth of debt. I pretty much financed my education by myself. I paid it off not that long ago. But for people graduating today, $20,000 in debt, even from a public school, is like a dream. Student fees and tuition are going up, and as a result, debt goes up, and kids graduate school. Well, kids, they're people at that point. Some of them run for office. When they do that, they're saddled with debt, and it's not just it's annoying, it makes it hard to buy a house, makes it hard to start a business, take risks in life. So this is not an accident. It's because the state has cut higher education spending dramatically, actually, probably beginning around the time when I graduated UMass in 2002. We need to restore higher ed spending in Massachusetts. Very important for young people, but young people shouldn't be pigeonholed. They want a lot of what everyone else wants. UMass and higher ed is very important in this district for everybody.
Joe, what do young people want?
Well, some folks may remember that the first debate of this Senate race was convened by high school students at Northampton High School. And they were students, the propelling group was the Students for Gun Safety, but then many other student organization groups joined in, and they asked magnificent questions of us, actually. And so I had the privilege of actually having a roundtable with these students not too long ago. And I went in thinking, they're going to want to talk about student debt, and they're going to want to talk about jobs and the environment. And yes, they did want to talk about that. They also wanted to talk about gun safety, and they also wanted us to kick it up a notch, because they saw that what we were doing at the local level and the state level would be incomplete unless a state senator looking for this job was also thinking nationally and globally in this 21st century. So they were talking about things like immigration reform and trade policies and the interconnectedness between all of these things. So they're thinking big, they're thinking broad and visionary. And part of the inspiration that I've gained over these weeks of campaigning has been from these young people in my campaign urging me forward to hold even more principled stances, even bolder steps forward, and think way outside the legislative box, which is really what we're going to need to do. In this next delegation going in, yes, we are losing 100 years of legislative experience, but it's time for a reset. We can send in new ideas and new thinkers and a new way forward, charged by these young people.
Thank you. We will go to 2-minute closing statements from each of the candidates, but before that, I have been asked to announce that these same candidates will be meeting tomorrow in another forum, co-sponsored by the Food Bank of Western Massachusetts, the League of Women Voters of Franklin County, and others. This forum will focus on food justice and health equity at Shea Theater in Turners Falls tomorrow night at 6:30. So now we will go to closing statements. 2 minutes apiece. Timekeepers are ready. We will begin with Chelsea.
Okay. Well, thank you all for hanging through this. I know these are long. I do want to say that when I fight for the priorities of this district, when I fight for single-payer health care, when I fight for education equity, when I fight for the environment, when I fight for strengthening our social safety net, I will do so with my personal experience, with my lived experiences, with my challenges that I have overcome and that I've faced, with my passion, with my conviction, and with my deep, deep love of this district. I really fundamentally believe that our government has the power to lift up marginalized communities and to provide every child with a great education, establish a free public higher education system, and to break down systems of oppression, that we can really work on equality out here. But I think that in order to actually achieve these monumental goals, we really need to have leaders with authentic, lived experiences that are impossible to ignore. I believe that we need leaders who will repeatedly and loudly say that Black lives matter, that trans lives matter, that Muslim lives matter, that immigrant lives matter, and low-income people's lives matter, and their happiness matters too. We need advocates who are willing to call for higher taxes on the wealthy. We need legislators who know what it means to struggle. And I will fight like hell for this district. Thank you.
Ryan?
I thank you for everyone who came out tonight. Thank you to the organizers of this event. Again, my name is Ryan O'Donnell. This part of the world is my home. This is not just a political undertaking for me, it's an emotional one. I grew up in the town of Amherst. I was raised in affordable housing in that community. My mother raised me by herself. She was a public school teacher in the city of Holyoke for many years. My grandfather also was a public school teacher. I'm probably the only one in my family who's not a public school teacher. But like them, in my own way, I believe in public service. And I know there's people who struggled a lot more than I did. And what I've learned through public service is it's actually possible to help people. It's easy to be cynical about politics. Please don't be cynical about politics. Maybe the fact that you're here tonight means that you're not. But I hope you leave with a greater sense that we have a reason to be hopeful. The legislative process can't fix everything. We have enormous forces in our world to deal with that are cultural and economic, and you name it, but I ardently believe in the power of us, through government, to create a better society. Some of the people who are retiring from the legislature, who we so much admired, they did that. That's what I hope to do. That's what I believe can be done. And if we do it in the right way, we can translate our values and the things that we believe in here in Western Mass into law. You know, we can have affordable housing. We can have a world-class transportation system. We can provide an equal education to people. These things are possible. These things are possible. I think it takes legislative experience. I think I'm unique in this race in being the only person with elected legislative experience. And to me, that's a good thing. I'm proud of it. I want to use it on behalf of my home in Western Mass to fight for our interests in Beacon Hill. So again, I'm Ryan O'Donnell. I'd be honored to have your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe, your closing statement.
Thank you so much to the organizers and to all of you for coming. So I was raised by public school teachers, and around the dinner table, my father, who was a social studies teacher, after he'd come home from knocking doors for candidates, would talk about this thing called democracy. And I remember being a kid and listening to him talking about the fact that government can and should work in the best interest of everyone, not just a wealthy few. That government had to be centered around people's values and the needs and interests of constituents, not special interests. And so I've had a flame of public service my entire life. I have lived in this region for 20 years, working outside of government to hold government accountable. My wife Ann and I are raising our 2 children here in Florence. She's a public school teacher in Chicopee. I am also the aberration. No one can understand how I came out a policy wonk when everyone around me is a public educator. But they, of course, lit the flame of public service. When I think about what distinguishes me in this race, I think about my deep issue expertise, 20 years working on a range of issues that matter to our district, my budget expertise, which is significant. At the end of my tenure with National Priorities Project, we were nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize because the Nobel Committee said that the data that we were getting out and putting into the hands of lawmakers was critical to our democracy. And I would posit that anyone who wants to sit at the State House can't just know a local budget or a state budget, but has to see the interplay between national, state, and local. And then I think about my proven track record. Again, working on the outside of government, I've had to know how government works because my work has been to hold lawmakers and government accountable, so that people not only get to actually just exist in local communities, but thrive and actually fulfill the promise of what they and themselves and their families want. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Steve, your closing.
Thank you. All the candidates here we have very similar positions, and I think we're all wonderful people.
That's nice.
I just want to say that if you're thinking of me, I'm a doer. And it gives me a unique perspective. I understand how small governments work. I work for 9 out of the 11 communities I work for are very small towns. I know what it's like to work with the legislature, what it's like to work with agencies, DTA, DHCD, all the alphabet. I also have helped write state law with the commission. I know what it's like to deal with the homeless and to get them housed and what it takes and how many times it might take. I know what it's like to deal with people who have been incarcerated or who are currently incarcerated. I know what it's like to work with people with disabilities, physical, emotional, and developmental, and mental health. I know what it's like to deal with addiction issues. I deal with folks every single day who are facing those problems. I know what it's like to deal with people who have gone through trauma and the consequences that come from that. I had a friend who was murdered, and a little kid was murdered along with him, with her, and all that we did as a family and as friends to make that get better. I know what it's like to work with people who are rape and sexual assault survivors. I'm one of them. I also know what it's like to go to the facility that houses level 4 sex offenders. I know what it's like to work with people in the community that are level 3 sex offenders and how important it is to house them so that they don't feel desperate. I know what it's like to advocate for individuals for what they need from state government. I've been doing it for a very long time, almost my entire career. And I also know what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck, because boy, this thing has kicked my butt running for this office. So if you
Thank
want,
you.
think about voting for me.
So that concludes. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for wanting to be more informed as voters to help make our democracy work. One final sentiment from the League of Women Voters. The League is the living legacy of the fight for votes for women, and we continue to fight for the enfranchisement of all citizens and for their unfettered access to the polls. Oh, please, always and every day, join us in the work of empowering voters and defending our democracy. And good night. Thank you.
Save the number? Lucky number? No.